It's my pleasure to introduce Christopher Sharman, who serves as the college's director of China Maritime Studies Institute. He comes to the War College following a conclusion of a 30-year active duty Navy tour as an intelligence officer. His Navy assignments included multiple sea tours based in Japan with the forward deployed naval forces, as well as deployments to the Persian Gulf and Baghdad in support of major combat operations. He served as a diplomat posted to the U.S. Embassy, as a Navy attaché in both Vietnam and in China, and as a National Security Affairs Fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. He has received language training through Defense Language Institute in Japanese, Chinese, and Vietnamese. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Christopher Sharman.
Well, thank you very much, and I do recognize that it's me standing between you and lunch, so I'll try to expeditiously step through a couple slides here. First, just to echo the thanks that have been expressed already. Chairman Holland, CEO Lang, your leadership of the foundation, thank you so much for what you've done. The President, Admiral Garvin, Provost Mariano, your stewardship and shepherding, kind of how we go through the process in our partnership. Thank you very much for what you've done. We at CMSI have been a beneficiary of Naval War College Foundation funds, and so thank you very much. But really, it's to you, the members. I was just blown away, honestly, looking at the level of generosity of so many people, and even if your name is not on that list, you're here today, and the moral support that you're giving to us here at the college. Really do appreciate it. So your gifts mean a lot, and we love the partnership that we have. So thank you very much. So last week, I had the opportunity to go down and testify before Congress. I was down there to speak to the Homeland Security Subcommittee on transportation and maritime security, topic being combating the gray zone, looking at China and the military maritime domain. Now, I was down there in my personal capacity, but the fact that Congress reached out and wanted to talk to me as one of the folks to testify, I think is a reflection of the great work that comes out of the War College. And I think, in particular, those who've gone before me in the China Maritime Studies Institute and the research that we have done on the gray zone warfare. I think it was a great hearing, some great takeaways, and a great opportunity for some wonderful exposure for here at the college. So what I'd like to do today is to briefly talk to you a little bit about what I told Congress, and then talk to you a little bit about what CMSI is doing about what we're seeing about China in the military maritime domain. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story here to kind of lay things out. I think it helps to set the stage for what we're all looking at. Back in February, a speedboat that was traveling from Sharman, which is on the mainland China, was entered into into Taiwan's prohibited and restricted waters around the island of Kinmen. Now, these prohibited and restricted waters are waters that Taiwan established back in 1992 to help keep the peace. You can see that Kinmen is only 6 miles away from mainland China. It's one of Taiwan's offshore islands, very, very close proximity. So as this speedboat entered into the prohibited and restricted waters, it was chased by Taiwan's Coast Guard. During the chase, the speedboat capsized. 2 of the 4 people on board were killed. These are PRC nationals that were killed. So in response to this incident, China's Taiwan Affairs Office, that's the organization that basically communicates about Taiwan in mainland China, said there is no such thing as prohibited and restricted waters, even though these waters have been able to help keep the peace since the 1990s, especially when they were established. Now, this isn't just words. This isn't just rhetoric coming out of the PRC. The PRC followed up this rhetoric with actions. Soon after the speedboat incident happened, a Taiwan ferry that was traveling from Kinmen around the island, it was a tourist ferry, was intercepted by the PRC Coast Guard. The Coast Guard intercepted the boat, boarded the vessel, inspected its logs, essentially carrying out a lawfare operation against this Coast Guard vessel, or against this ferry. Now, it didn't stop there. During the month of March, we started to see PRC Coast Guard vessels routinely penetrate these prohibited and restricted waters. 4 times in March, 4 times in April. They entered into these waters, and then 8 times in May. And during these incursions, they're operating inside these waters, essentially eviscerating the existence of these prohibited and restricted waters, these things that have helped keep the peace for so long in the offshore, between the offshore islands and the islands of the mainland China. So if that wasn't enough, just about a week and a half ago, the PRC turned the rheostat up one more notch. 2 Chinese small Navy vessels entered into these waters. So we were seeing a trend here. We're seeing a trend of PRC trying to eliminate Taiwan's sovereignty, its ability to enforce its own laws. And it's important that we focus in on what's happening at Kinmen. You know, why does Kinmen matter? Why am I even talking about this? Because what happens around Kinmen, these offshore islands, this is a test bed that the PRC uses for how it's going to conduct operations around Taiwan writ large. So let's talk about that. In late May, just after the inauguration of Taiwan's new president, the PRC announced a major exercise. This was the 3rd major exercise they've done around Taiwan in as many years. Now, this exercise, I'm not going to go through all the details about it, but this exercise was particularly interesting from a maritime perspective. First of all, they announced several closure areas around the islands. Now, if you know the geography of Taiwan, these closure areas are concentrated around strategic lines of communication that are leading into the ports around Taiwan. Everything from Kaohsiung in the south, Taipei in the north, in the east, Hualien. And there's a closure area there, essentially, where they would potentially be used to close off traffic in the Taiwan Strait. But that's not what I found really interesting. What I found interesting was that maritime footprint that they had. They had 19 Navy vessels, PLA and Navy vessels, operating around Taiwan during the exercise. That's interesting. Wasn't a record. 9 to 20 is the actual record. 19's a big footprint. What was most interesting was how they used their Coast Guard. Their Coast Guard stationed several ships near the offshore islands and conducted operations around those offshore islands, similar to what we saw happening around Kinmen. But what was most interesting was we started to see Chinese Coast Guard operations to the east of Taiwan. Essentially, this is a harbinger for PRC law enforcement operations in the Western Pacific, an expansion of how China is going to conduct or looking to conduct lawfare in the Western Pacific. So very interesting evolution here in development in China's military maritime domain. So let's zoom out just a little bit further. I pulled some headlines. These are from the last 2 weeks. These are major events that have happened in the military maritime domain of China in just the last 2 weeks. Just stepping through a couple of these, the China Coast Guard setting a record of numbers of days operating within the contiguous zone or the territorial waters of the Senkaku Islands around Japan. The number of maritime militia ships that the PRC has sent down operating around the Philippines and some of the gray zone operations. You've certainly seen on television the water cannoning incidents between the Coast Guard and the Philippines as they've tried to do resupply efforts at Second Thomas Shoal. You see maritime exercises between China, Russia, and Iran, and then China continues to commission new advanced ships, such as the Type 55 vessel, 10th, their most sophisticated cruiser. So let's talk briefly about what is CMSI doing to address this maritime challenge. Certainly there's a heck of a lot going on. That's just a snapshot in time. What I think one of the things that I've come in as director I've recognized is that there's no way that CMSI by itself can address China in the military and maritime domain. What we need is partnerships. These are partnerships around the college, but these are partnerships beyond the college as well. So one of the things we did last March is we were able to look to build some international partnerships. That we have no corner on China in the military maritime domain. Every nation out there is very concerned about what China is doing, and they're devoting some resources to do research on China in the military maritime domain. And the more that we can partner with our international partners, we can sharpen iron with iron, and we can grow and advance in our own capabilities. So in March, In part because of the specific generosity of the War College Foundation, and again, thank you, we were able to take our entire team, the CMSI team, out to both Japan and Taiwan to identify where are those partners, who's working what issues, how can we collaborate to put out better research and better findings in the future. So we were able to go to Japan, where, while we were there, unscheduled, the Japanese Chief of Naval Operation reached out to us and said, hey, I'd like to have a meeting with you. That was not scheduled. You all know that's not the kind of things that CNOs just do. It was a great opportunity, though, to talk to him about how we saw the world, but also how he saw the world. In particular, what he was focusing in on is he looked at what's happening in China-Taiwan. He recognizes the challenge that the China-Taiwan dynamic plays. Where he was particularly interested was what comes after China-Taiwan, whether it's settled through a military conflict or whether it's some sort of peaceful unification effort. What happens ever? How is Asia going to be postured? Very interesting perspective that he had. Of course, expressing concerns about the China Coast Guard operations and some of the changing tactics and dynamics that we're seeing coming out of China Coast Guard. And then when we were over at what was called the Maritime Command and Staff College, their counterpart to the Naval War College, they've taken a look at what CMSI does, and they said, you know what, we want to have an organization that does what CMSI does. So they've established their own organization inside the Japan's Maritime Command and Staff College, as Japan would like to do, ICMS, the Institute of China Maritime Studies, CMSI backwards or something. So we now have a partner in Japan for closer collaboration. In Taiwan, we had the opportunity to go walk the beaches. These are what are called the red beaches. These are the potential invasion beaches that the PRC might use in the event of an amphibious operation against Taiwan. What was particularly interesting as we walked the beaches is that the beaches themselves, sure, these beaches themselves are conducive for landing, but once you get off those beaches, the infrastructure that's on Taiwan, the topography and the mountains that are behind the beaches make an amphibious landing incredibly difficult for the PRC. So this is not a fait accompli. China has some hurdles to get through as it looks at military options for Taiwan. There's a lot of rhetoric out there in the press about invasion. It is certainly one of the options that are on the table, but an invasion is very, very difficult. While we were also in Taiwan, we had the opportunity to talk with M&D officials about that tension between what they see on a daily basis, that those gray zone operations that the PRC is doing against Taiwan, and how there is a need in Taiwan to match these incursions with capital ships and large platforms to demonstrate and show that they are there to ward off PRC incursions. But there's a tension there. There's a tension between that big capital platform and those smaller tactical capabilities that the Taiwan may need to perhaps use when there's an event of an attempted amphibious invasion. And we did get some great insights in Taiwan resiliency. Met with an organization called Kuma Academy. Kuma Academy is an organization that actually trains Taiwan. So this is one of several organizations in Taiwan that train Taiwan citizens how to deal with various contingencies. In this case, they're working on a lot of medical resiliency, but this is just one of several different organizations around the country. We had an opportunity to understand a little bit more about how they train their citizens for resiliency. So another fascinating visit. So how do you find out about what CMSI is doing, and what are we doing right now? Since I've come on, we've added a couple new research lines. I'll very quickly speak through what we have. On the far left, or my far right, is our Red Book series. We have published 18 of these volumes. These are essentially long monographs on a particular China military maritime related issue. We produce these in hard copy, and we produce these through the Naval War College Press. A relatively slow process as we go through the hard copy publishing, and as well as the research that goes into it. So these are slow. So what we've moved to is a much more dynamic way of doing business inside of CMSI. And that is, we've really tried to move to an online production format to make our research available to a wider audience much faster. So we have our China Maritime Reports. That's that second one in that blue-covered document. China Maritime Reports are essentially shorter documents, a shorter version of those long-form monographs, 18 to 20 pages. We're about to publish our 39th one of these here in the next 2 weeks. Since coming on, I brought on what are a new line of products. I said, even these China Maritime Reports, they're wonderful, but they take a lot of time to get out. So we need to find a way to get out items that are policy relevant, that are dynamic, that folks need to understand right now. We've established a line called our CMSI Notes, and those are essentially 7 to 8 page papers on a topic that is of particular interest. We have one coming out here this week that'll be talking about China's carrier strike group or carrier battle group developments, how they are structuring their carrier battle groups. It'll be fascinating coming out. We're also publishing now our translations. These aren't just translations you stick into a computer and see what comes out. These are taking two of our researchers, putting a very dedicated and devoted time into figure out the nuance that they're seeing in some of these Chinese concepts and be able to explain that nuance inside that translation, to be able to turn these concepts that we're seeing in PRC into reality for those that are reading. And then we have, to keep updated what we're doing, we've now established a newsletter. This is a quarterly newsletter. Well, our next one will be going out here just in a couple weeks as well. So I won't go through every area of research that we're doing, but we are actively involved in research, and we're looking at the areas that I think are the most important for the U.S. Navy, DoD, and for a greater understanding of what China's doing in the military maritime domain. Just by way of example of some of the things we're looking at, Operation Causeway, one of our new professors, Ian Easton, is taking a look at how did Japan defend Taiwan during World War II, and how did that thwart or deter the United States from invading Taiwan during World War II. It's a battle that never happened, but it's a great one to understand, is to see how deterrence can work once, how can it work again. Some of the other areas that we're researching are listed there, and all these will count in various forms of studies here, all within the next couple months. But I want to talk briefly about our way ahead and what we're looking at. We, of course, have numerous publications that are coming out, and we'll be formalizing our affiliate program. But one of the things I wanted to flag for this group in particular was every 2 years, we do a conference right here in this room. And in that conference, we invite a lot of special guests, but we invite the War College Foundation in particular. We'd very much like to see several of you to be able to attend our conference. We don't have the calendar yet, but we are hoping to do it in mid-May of 2025. And we'll be looking at the people of China's military maritime domain. Who is that person on that ship that is shadowing you in the South China Sea? What makes who he or she is? What's their background, their training? What makes them think the way they do? And to really get some insights into how they operate and how they think. And so that'll be the focus of the conference, and certainly look forward to having several of you there. And then over the course of the next year, we look to replicate the success of our recent trip to Japan and to Taiwan and identifying some of the partners there, but maybe branching out next year and going to some other places. I was an attaché in Vietnam, and so I'd like to leverage that background to build some of the relationships I know can be had out there in Vietnam and also the Philippines, which is really on the front line of China's maritime gray zone operations right now. So with that said, how do you find out about what CMSI is doing? Just Google CMSI NWC. First one comes right up. It's real easy. Inside there is a place to click on to see all issues, and you can sign up for our campaign. We're working with the library and our IRD program to be able to allow you to subscribe, and we can do the smart push. You don't have to keep looking for what's new in CMSI, but certainly welcome new additions to our list. And with that, I may have time for one or two questions. Leave it. Okay, with that, I'll maybe one or two questions, and then I'll turn it over so you guys can get to lunch, and I think I finished just about on time.
Questions for Christopher?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, oh, sure. The question is, how do you work with ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence, or the Defense Intelligence Agency, to figure out the topics? I think one of the things that's very important about CMSI and that's important is that we don't want to replicate what ONI does. We don't want to replicate what DIA does. We have a fantastic intelligence community. Let's let the intelligence community do its work. what we're looking at is we're looking for those areas. What are those things that ONI and DIA and some of the other elements of the intel community aren't necessarily looking at? Some of those more difficult areas that we can dive into, that we can maybe provide that foundation research and then maybe hand off to an ONI or a DIA or some of the other organizations. So we certainly are talking to the intel community writ large, but we are looking for those areas that they're not addressing as opposed to areas to duplicate some of their efforts. Yeah, China, it's a great question. The question is, what is China up to? What is the impact of this on China's thinking? It's a great question. Let me flip the script a little bit on this one, and where I think this allows us to do, and the research that we're doing, is allows us to truly get some insights into what China's thinking. It's getting inside their mind a little bit more than perhaps we do through traditional sources and some of the traditional methods. It's creating opportunities for us to really get at areas in which are not addressed through traditional means, and so it's a unique approach to research that is really the Air Force has actually recently just replicated our effort, and down at their War College they've established what's an organization called CASI. They recognize the value for this. CASI is the China Aerospace Studies Institute. The Army has looked at what we do at CMSI and said, you know what, we want to have one of those too. The Army has now established the Land Power Center, the China Land Power Center. The Marines are standing up at their War College, are now standing up at China. All these groups, we're all partnered, we're all talking to each other, are all looking at China from what China is saying about what they're doing and where they're going. It makes us really different from other organizations that just look at China from the outside. We're looking for the inside out, if that makes sense. Right. What have you concluded? You know, I think, yeah, no, another great question. What have we concluded? I think what this does is add color to the tapestry that China is. It's not monolithic. There are a lot of divisions within China. There are a lot of competing factions. But I think a takeaway is that they are incredibly focused. They are incredibly focused on developing modernization goals by 2035 to develop to what they call transform into a world-class military by 2049. And you've heard about these dates that are out there. You've heard about 2027, and people blow that number out of proportion. You definitely see them working towards very specific capabilities they want to have by very specific milestones. So I think what we have is a very determined adversary and a very focused adversary. I think it behooves us to ensure that we know the most we can about what it's doing and what it's thinking, and we hope that CMSI helps to shed some light on what it's doing. So, great. I mean, maybe one more. I'll defer to you guys.
Yeah, we have time.
Yeah, great question. How do you, essentially, dissemination, how do we ensure that we are active out there to ensure the research is getting out there? One of the things that we are trying to do within CMSI, and we're working with our partners in some of the other institutes as well, is through social media. One of the things, not only are we put these out where you can subscribe and you can get this stuff, but, social media gets it out to the general public. There's an education responsibility I think we have, but that education responsibility, first and foremost, is to DOD, it's to the Navy, DOD, and to ensure that the fleet understands really what's going on. So what we do is we will make sure that we spend time with the fleet and spend time with other elements within the DOD to do some real education on what China's doing. Every single flag officer that comes through here for their flag training education sits down with us, and we're able to sit and talk about what China's doing, where they're going, and how they're getting there, and then they can take that to their organizations, and they can spread the word across the Navy and DOD about what's going on. So the Navy DOD is our primary audience, and that's what we like to play to, but I think there's a wider education responsibility as well, and we're using different mechanisms to try and reach other audiences. Great. So with that, all right, thank you all very much. Thank you.